Picture this. It's 1621, and the air over a tiny Pacific island reeks of nutmeg and smoke. Dutch soldiers move through burning villages on the Banda Islands. Nutmeg trees are hacked down or seized, people chased into the forests or onto boats. By the time they're done, maybe 14,000 Bandanese are dead, enslaved, or gone. All of this for a spice shaved into soups and sauces in Amsterdam and London. Now jump 2 continents away. In a canal house in Amsterdam, merchants crowd into the Oostindische House, the East India House. Quills scrape across ledgers, numbers fly, hands change money. No kings here, just investors. What links these men in black coats to the ash and blood of Banda? A company, the Vereenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC. Its logo is carved into cannons, stitched on flags, stamped into silver coins. This one firm can sign treaties, build forts, field a private army, even hold its own trials and executions. Later generations would call it the world's first multinational. Memes today still claim it was the richest company in history. But the real story is stranger and darker than any infographic. Because this wasn't just a trading firm, it was a laboratory for modern capitalism, powered by conquest and slavery. It helped invent the stock market, rewired global trade, and then slowly destroyed itself from the inside. In less than 2 centuries, the VOC sent almost 1 million Europeans towards Asia. Only about a third ever came back. Disease, shipwrecks, and violence killed roughly 4,000 people a year. Its ships also carried tens of thousands of enslaved Africans and Asians, uprooted to work plantations, mines, and households from Batavia to the Cape of Good Hope. At that Cape outpost, founded in 1652 as a simple refreshment station, the company laid the foundations of a settler colony built on seized Khoikhoi land and imported slave labor. For many Dutch people, the VOC still symbolizes a golden age. Bustling quays, exotic goods, and what former Prime Minister Jan Peter Balkenende once praised as the VOC mentality: bold, dynamic, entrepreneurial. For others, Moluccan, Indo, Surinamese, South African, that same logo recalls dispossession, deportation, and forced work. So how did a small republic's trading company become a kind of corporate empire? And why did it fall? At the end of the 1500s, the Portuguese still dominated the sea route to Asia. Pepper, cloves, and nutmeg flowed to Europe through their network. Demand was huge, supply limited, and every shortage sent prices through the roof. Then, a twist. In 1580, the crowns of Portugal and Spain united. Spain was already at war with the rebellious Dutch provinces. Overnight, Dutch merchants buying Portuguese pepper were effectively funding their enemy. At the same time, Dutch sailors had stolen the Portuguese secrets, routes, winds, ports. Men like Jan Huygen van Linschoten brought home maps and sailing directions. So Dutch merchants did something radical. They stopped buying from Lisbon and tried sailing east themselves. They formed small pre-companies for single voyages. Investors would fund a fleet, wait a couple of years, then liquidate everything when the ships returned. Profits could be huge, but so were the risks. Too many ships arriving at once could crash spice prices and ruin them all. In 1600, the English solved this by bundling their resources into the English East India Company with a royal monopoly? The Dutch answer came 2 years later. In 1602, under statesman Johan van Oldenbarnevelt, the States General forced the warring pre-companies to merge into one, the Vereenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the United East India Company. In return, the VOC got a 21-year monopoly over all Dutch trade east of the Cape of Good Hope and west of the Strait of Magellan. And more than that, its charter let it wage war, build forts, strike treaties, and mint coins. It was a company with state powers. It also changed how investment worked. Instead of funding one voyage at a time, the VOC raised a permanent capital of about 6.4 million guilders. Shares were locked in. If you wanted your money back, you had to sell to someone else. Those resales in a windy Amsterdam courtyard became the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the prototype for every trading floor that came after. Ordinary merchants, widows, and craftsmen could now buy a tiny slice of Asia trade, not just princes. On paper, this was brilliant, but paper had to be backed by something. Ships, ports, monopoly. Early on, the VOC grabbed chances wherever it could. In 1603, it captured the Santa Catarina, a huge Portuguese merchantman off the Malay coast. The auction of that one ship's cargo brought in more than half the company's starting capital. The VOC set up pepper posts in Banten and Jayakarta on Java, allied with Muslim chiefs on Ambon to push out the Portuguese, and sailed east into the fabled Spice Islands, Maluku and Banda. The man who turned this scattered trading network into a proper empire was Jan Pieter Zoon Koen. Appointed Governor-General in 1619, Koen mixed accountant's calm with a fanatic belief in monopoly. In one letter to the directors in Holland, he wrote, "Trade in Asia must be driven and maintained under the protection and favour of your honour's own weapons. We cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade." He meant every word. That same year, he shelled and burned the Javanese port of Jayakarta after a dispute, drove out its ruler, and built a new capital on the ruins, Batavia, today's Jakarta. From this fortified hub, VOC fleets fanned out to India, Ceylon, Japan, and Manila, and down through the Indonesian archipelago. Then Koen turned to the Banda Islands. For generations, the Bandanese had sold nutmeg to many buyers, Portuguese, Asian, sometimes English, playing them off against each other to keep their autonomy and prices high. The VOC wanted all of it. After years of pressure and skirmishes, Koen led a full-scale assault in 1621. Villages were destroyed. People were executed, starved, or hunted down. Of an estimated 15,000 islanders, perhaps 1,000 remained on Banda afterward. To keep the nutmeg flowing, the VOC imported enslaved labourers to work new Dutch-run estates. Each year, hundreds more were shipped in just to maintain the workforce. For VOC shareholders back home, Banda was a financial triumph. For the people who lived there, it was a disaster from which their society never fully recovered. This was how the company liked its trade. One seller, one buyer, no competition. The model repeated elsewhere, though not always so violently. In Ceylon, the VOC worked with the inland kingdom of Kandy to drive out the Portuguese, then quietly took over their forts and cinnamon monopoly. On the Indian Ocean's stormy southern tip, it built a resupply station at the Cape of Good Hope in 1652 under Jan van Riebeeck. That Cape outpost began as a vegetable garden for ships. Within a few years, Van Riebeeck decided it would be cheaper to grant land to free European farmers and import enslaved laborers than rely on local Khoikhoi herders. The VOC first tried to enslave the Khoikhoi directly, then backed off, fearing constant escape and revolt. Instead, it started bringing in slaves from West Africa, then mostly from Madagascar, Ceylon, and the Indonesian archipelago. By 1700, around 1,000 enslaved people worked at the Cape. By 1795, their number had risen to about 25,000, outnumbering the 20,000 or so Europeans. Many of these slaves were war captives or convicts from other VOC territories, shipped across oceans into a new, harsh world. Khoikhoi society, meanwhile, was shattered by land seizures, war, and smallpox. Some were pushed into work as herders on Dutch farms. Others moved away. Many simply died. A supply stop had become a settler colony. From a distance, though, the VOC looked unbeatable. It fielded more ships, more men, and moved more Asian goods than any other European rival. For much of the 17th century, it paid shareholders average dividends of around 18% on their original investments. In one flush year, the dividend hit 40%. By 1669, the company boasted around 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, tens of thousands of employees, and a private army of about 10,000 soldiers. It was a state within a state. But those numbers hid deep flaws. Power formerly rested with the Herons 17, the Lords 17, chosen from the 6 regional chambers that provided the original capital. Amsterdam held the biggest block of seats and called most of the shots. The directors were wealthy regents and merchants. Their liability was limited. If the VOC collapsed, their private fortunes were safe. On the other side of the world, in Batavia, governors-general and senior officials had enormous autonomy. Communication with Holland took a year each way. Salaries were low, opportunities for private trade were huge, and oversight was weak. In that environment, corruption was not an exception. It was an expectation. Some shareholders fought back. In 1609, Isaac Lemaire, the biggest single investor, accused the directors of holding investors' money longer than promised and pushed for liquidation. In 1622, another group grumbled that the books had been smeared with bacon so that dogs might eat them, rather than be audited. They lost those battles, but they left a paper trail, the first recorded acts of shareholder activism and corporate governance disputes. The VOC survived them. What it couldn't survive was a changing world. Around 1700, European tastes shifted. Tea, coffee, sugar, cotton textiles, Chinese porcelain, these now drove demand. Spices remained important, but no longer commanded sky-high prices. The VOC followed the money. It poured capital into Bengal's textiles, into Javanese coffee, into tea and porcelain from China. Trade volumes soared, revenues went up, but profits did not. Unlike nutmeg or cloves, which the VOC could monopolize by force, these new goods had many suppliers. If the VOC tried to raise prices too far, buyers could turn to English, French, Danish, or local competitors. The company now operated in markets where it had to compete, not dictate. At the same time, its costs stayed heavy. Forts, garrisons, shipyards, and bureaucrats across Asia all had to be paid. Mortality at sea and in the tropics remained awful. Out of roughly 1 million Europeans sent east over the company's life, only about 340,000 made it home. Historians call what followed profitless growth. The VOC was bigger than ever, but its margins were thin. Long-term average profits in the early Golden Age had been around 2.1 million guilders a year. In the later Expansion Age, they barely reached 2 million, despite much higher turnover. Yet in the Netherlands, investors still expected fat payouts. The company's share price held up. Dividends stayed generous. Directors met those expectations the easiest way, by hollowing the company out. From roughly 1730 onward, dividends regularly exceeded the profits actually earned in Europe. To plug the gap, the VOC drained capital from its Asian trading fund and borrowed against future cargoes. It sold tomorrow to pay shareholders today. Meanwhile, rivals grew bolder. The English East India Company shipped tea straight from China to London. French and Danish companies elbowed into Indian and Southeast Asian ports. In India, Dutch influence shrank, especially after a stinging defeat by the Kingdom of Travancore at Khoikhoi in 1741. Travancore's ruler, Marthanda Varma, not only crushed a VOC force, but captured its commander, then hired him to train his own army. Inside the VOC's Asian domains, tensions also exploded. In Batavia, a sugar crash in the 1730s hit Chinese planters and traders hardest. Many faced bankruptcy or deportation. Rumors spread that VOC officials planned mass expulsions. In 1740, violence broke out. VOC troops and allied militias went door to door in Chinese neighborhoods. Over days of killing, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 ethnic Chinese residents were massacred. For the first time, the board in Amsterdam launched a serious investigation into its colonial government. It produced reports, not transformation. By 1780, the VOC remained huge on paper, tens of millions of guilders in ships, stocks of goods, and colonial assets. Reform plans circulated. None were truly implemented. Then, international politics delivered the final blow. In the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, British warships targeted Dutch commerce worldwide. VOC convoys were captured or burned. Forts in Asia fell or surrendered. Direct losses from the war have been estimated at over 40 million guilders. To stay afloat, the company took on more loans. By the mid-1790s, its net assets were effectively gone. In 1796, the old board was dismissed. A revolutionary committee took over management. On December 31st, 1799, the VOC's charter quietly expired. The Dutch state absorbed its debts and its empire. A company that had once dictated terms to kings vanished as a legal person. What do we do with that story now? In Dutch politics, VOC mentality still sometimes pops up as a compliment. Energy, confidence, a willingness to look across borders. Critics hear something else in that phrase, a nostalgia that edits out conquest, monopoly, and slavery. The VOC is not just a symbol, it's a vast archive. Around 25 million pages of its records survive, scattered from The Hague to Jakarta, Cape Town, Chennai, and Colombo. They track everything from spice prices and ship movements to local rebellions and missionary reports. In 2003, UNESCO added these archives to its Memory of the World register. Those documents let us reconstruct more than the balance sheet. They let us see the human webs a corporation tied together and tore apart. They also force a question. When a profit-driven organization gains the ability to wage war, shape laws, and move people and resources around the globe, what controls it? 17th-century Dutch investors were already asking early versions of that question when they demanded audits and transparency. We're still asking it now, in different words, about different giants. We don't inherit guilt for what a long-dead company did, but we do inherit its systems: joint stock ownership, limited liability, global supply chains, and the idea that shareholder return justifies almost anything done far away, to people we'll never meet. The VOC shows how powerful and how dangerous that idea can be when it isn't checked by accountability. A small republic's trading firm helped redraw the map of the world. The corporations we build today can do the same. The real choice is whether, 400 years from now, people will look at our logos the way we now look at that sharp little VOC, and what kind of map they'll see behind them.